What are your night shift horror stories? Worked a parking garage at the airport. Cleaning the top deck and noticed about 100 ravens all over a truck with a tarp over the bed. Took my flashlight expecting something awful. Noticed as I got closer the smell and the ravens taking turns going in a hole they had torn open and popping out covered in gunk. Some guy left a broke down beater with a couple animal carcasses in the back to rot. No heads. Checked the logs and the damn truck had been there since November and it was April. So everything was just thawing and breaking down. I used to work night shift as a care aide in an old folks home. It was already creepy. The home was an old hospital that was converted. Some arsehole kept walking around the courtyard after dark dressed as the Grim Reaper knocking on doors. It was actually really scary. He ran off and the facility got a security guard for a few weeks. Of all the heartless and insensitive things to do. I swear some people are simply devoid of morals and it's not a new phenomenon. It's always been this way. This didn't become a horror story until recently, but as a teen. I used to close down the gas station truck stop I worked at. Alone. My boss used to pop up out of the shadows as I was closing down the till with the backup lights on. He'd be super calm and act like it wasn't creepy at 11 PM when he should be home with his family. He was even at my high school graduation. He and his wife's number's still in my phone. Anyhow. He is currently on trial for murdering a prostitute via stabbing her to death. Back in 94. Cold case potentially solved via DNA and modern science. Was an orderly in a hospital. Two of us were sitting in the basement office adjacent to the morgue. A guy passed our office. Looking at us a little shifty. Came back again and asked if we had access to the morgue. We said yes. Thinking he was doing a pickup for a funeral home. But that seemed strange given it was around 12:30 a.m. Nope. He wanted to pay us to let him in. And leave him alone with the bodies for an hour. We escorted him up to security. Apparently he had tried it in the past. As security knew him. Was running the register at 24 Hours supermarket. Stock person comes running in to produce carrying mop handle screaming you mother. Out of sight. He keeps yelling and smacking handle or something. For like 5 minutes. I am ringing up customers. And freaking out because he was losing his mind. But I am not interested in getting involved in a murder. So I ignore it. Later I find out he was chasing a rat. Did hospital security for about 2 months. It was small hospital out in the sticks, so we were responsible for removing patients who had passed from their rooms and transferring into the morgue freezer. We had just brought a dissident to the morgue and right before we were about to transfer them to the freezer their cell phone rang. Granted. Pretty tame compared to some stories. But at the time it gave us a decent fright. That's actually really sad. Someone was trying to reach them and didn't yet know that they had died. Many years ago I briefly had a job that started at 3:30 am. The job itself was very boring. But the commute was wild. The world is at its weirdest in the very early morning. Road hazards haven't been called in yet. So one day I pulled off the freeway and discovered that the off-ramp was completely flooded. Deep enough that I have no idea how my car didn't stall. But the most interesting discovery was that if law enforcement has to raid a home, they do it around 3 or 4 in the morning because that's the best chance of everyone being peacefully asleep. One day I was nearly to work when I noticed something off ahead of me. I slowed down and came up to a massive police blockade. Squad cars everywhere and absolutely crawling with heavily armed officers. But all in absolute silence. They silently waved me down a side street. Just a creepy, unsettling experience. Leaving one night from work I was followed by a log truck and it kept going faster and faster until I was at 100 miles per hour. I pulled off as the truck blew past my car rocking it. Thing was there was twisty turns ahead. Couldn't find the truck. Update. No, he wasn't experiencing brake failure. This was on an uphill which the route is slow and progressively uphill. I'm not on the Geopavy nor 4th of July pass. It was just hauling ass. They were running bobtail. Usually if a truck loses brakes, the driver would probably engage engine brakes and downshift. Worked at a liquor store for a few years. One of the homeless guys, probably late 50s, that stood outside would ask for money, and 9 times out of 10 if they said no, he'd flash them his old wrinkly crusty package. Had to chase him off every night so people didn't have to suffer that sight. Annoyingly, people who saw me chasing him off or threatening to call the cops often gave me dirty looks, like as if I hated homeless people or treat them like trash. When in actuality I was saving them from that which you cannot unsee. I worked in a residential treatment center for teen girls. One girl with some severe trauma, RP, abuse, came sleepwalking into the room screaming to please untie her while clawing at her wrists. She was begging me to help her because he's torturing me. I sat her down and pulled her bracelets and watch off. She went completely limp, then got up and went back to bed. It freaked me out seeing the raw emotion of her trauma, since she was always smiling and relatively calm during the day. Another time I was doing my nightly checks and a guy suddenly walked out from behind the door coming at me. I screamed and threw my flashlight at him. It was a smiley face balloon. That second scenario sounds like the fake out in a horror movie before you turn around and the actual murderer is standing there. Work in the winter for me is plowing and snow removal. It was late and I had been out for over 24 hours at this point. Pulled over into a small cul-de-sac with the nearest house being over a 100 yards away so I could let the truck stay on so I could stay warm. 6-wheel Mack things loud. As I'm nodding off, there was a very loud bang and it felt like someone had pulled on my driver's side door handle. Luckily I always lock my truck doors. This sounds a lot like exploding head syndrome. More of a very weird event. Sometimes work night shifts. One time was going home around 4 AM or so. It was pitch dark outside and very quiet. Person on a bike came out of nowhere. Said he remembered me from middle school, even said the right school name, and rode off. Worked as an evening manager at a major Hilton property. Got a complaint from a bunch of guests about the noise coming from one of the rooms. Turns out, a drunken man was beating the out of his wife and had the door barricaded so we couldn't get in. I called the cops. And they had to get into the room using the balcony from the next room over. I'm still traumatized by what I saw when they finally arrested him and got the wife out of the room. She was covered in blood. It was horrifying. Used to work night shift at a 24-hour Walmart. Customers are nuts enough in the daytime, but they become weird after midnight. Once had an elderly guy come in wearing only a jean jacket and fishnet stockings. He came up to my register, leaned in, and asked if we carried anything to get rid of lice. Those plastic barriers all stores have now to protect cashiers? They need to keep those even after the pandemic ends. I lost count of the times customers got into my personal space to ask about products for fleas, lice, rashes. Well, if I got a rash I'm not gonna scream down an aisle, hey where's the dick cream? Was walking through the simulation lab for nursing students at the hospital I work at on very little sleep. All the lights were off and it was my first time working night shift. Turned a corner and saw what I thought was a person standing behind a lamp that was on. Turns out it was a mannequin holding the pull cord. Worked at a distress center almost 10 years ago. Was on the 12 AM to 6 AM shift. Got about 2 phone calls each hour of the shift from the same guy saying that he's tied up in a room. His balls are tied up with leather straps. And his wife is getting banged by 5 giant black guys in the other room. Asked him each time if he's in distress and he says no every time. Kept telling him if he's not in distress then he shouldn't be calling and let him go. I just can't believe he was up from 12 to 6 AM to make those calls. I was closing supervisor at a grocery store and someone managed to between the bathroom and the exit doors at 8:59. We close at 9:00. You'd think oh there's literal on the floor, surely people will walk around it. No, instead they continue to plow through it, so now there's on multiple grocery carts. The exit is scattered with fesses. There's on people's shoes undoubtedly. And there's in the parking lot. Luckily for me, my less squeamish supervisor working with me that closing night volunteered to mop up the exit and bathroom, which to our surprise had also been on. For the record, human makes me immediately gag and vomit when I get a whiff of it, so I ended up puking in the trash next to the exit. I was working the Christmas Eve night shift in my local emergency department. The clock struck 4 AM on Christmas morning and the emergency buzzer sounded. A 74-year-old male patient had gone into a sudden cardiac arrest. The buzzer wasn't working properly, so we couldn't locate where exactly in the department it was coming from. Once we finally figured it out, we got in there and I took over chest compressions. A team of anesthetists, nurses, doctors, and 20 minutes later, we managed to get him back for just long enough for his family to come and say goodbye to him. What a Thai Christmas. Overnight at the supermarket, man stole the live lobsters and ran out of the store with them in his sweatpants. Like all in his pants. Lobsters falling out of his pockets. Out of the cuffs of his pants. Etc. Night manager running after him yelling. It was quite a sight. Also, one morning the newspaper delivery guy came to drop off the newspapers at 4 AM and some rando guy that seemed to be on drugs that I had just cashed out jumped in the newspaper guy's car and took off. Night manager chased him as he sped off. Working late at my office workshop one night. I'm doing analyses that take a while to run, so I tend to snack and watch Netflix. Or try and do another mundane task that needs to just run by itself. This is a big building. But I'm in the basement where no one goes. And the air can shuts off at night with little ventilation, so it gets warm. Semicolon. The horror story was more for the security guard that walked in on me. A 2-meter tall man. With no shirt on. Heavily tattooed. Eating cereal at like 3 AM walking around. I could never look him in the eye after that. One of the managers came through the drive-thru at 4 in the morning and ordered an absurd amount of food and then vomited out the window of whoever's car it was onto the drive-thru. Turns out she was the manager that was starting at 7, and she said not to worry about the vomit and that she'd clean it up when she started. The amazing thing is that she arrived on time and cleaned it up. Not a horror story for me, but sure as hell one for her. Working third shift security at a condo. And a mother left the bathroom to check on their mac and cheese. Her 2-year-old drowned in the tub. Once the police were done, my boss called me and told me I had to go talk to the family and find out what happened, even though we knew from the police telling us. My daughter was about 2 at the time. It broke my heart to even hear the story from the guy I relieved. And then I had to go ask the family to tell some Dumas rent-a-cop about it as well. For a change of pace, here's a nice one. I was taking my break outside and a little mouse came up to me, so I gave him a bit of pot noodle and he sat on the floor next to me munching away on it. What an excellent time to read this. At 2:42 AM. Completely alone in the 8th floor of the building because I'm the only person in the night shift. I work at a hotel in the middle of city and I was on the overnight front desk shift when me and my valet at the time realized there was a man in one of the guest rooms that was prior occupied. We called the police and found that the guests upstairs hogtied him. So he was escorted out. Nothing too crazy. Stuff like that happens all the time in a hotel like this. But we had the 3 lowest floors of the hotel shut down due to low occupancy during COVID-19. We soon discovered he was caught in the guest's room after trying to open every door from the floor up, seeing if it was unlocked or propped open slightly. He was staying in one of our vacant rooms on the low floor unknown to us for a week, stealing food from the mini bar and banquet halls. We watched him on the security cameras on the lower floors walking around the halls every night butt naked and videoing himself. My nightmare came from my partner doing night shift. He was swapping from days to nights constantly with only a day to try and adjust his sleep cycle in between, mining. It took the biggest toll on his well-being to the point he was telling me he was just going to run his car off the road on his way to his next swing. He could barely string a sentence together. Messing with your circadian rhythm is no joke. I can only imagine how many years he's shaved off his life in the long run. I was a night shift team lead at a homeless shelter. I have too many horror stories, but a standout is when one of the clients died. When we found her, she had been dead for several hours. We still attempted CPR. Very unsettling and traumatizing experience. Not only for the interaction with a dead body, but also just knowing she died on the floor in this warehouse and that several of us had likely walked by her while she was dead. Night shift nurse picked up the phone about 2 AM. Don't panic. But recognized it as one of the C-suite's voices. I was immediately worried. There's an electrical issue in the something another closet. There's a chance it may explode. You need to evacuate all patients from the area. Just me and one other nurse with 5 moms, their 5 babies. And however many visitors. We quickly jumped into our own little, panic-driven task force. We had packed up enough diapers, wipes, formula, water, snacks, and blankets to be evacuated for a week. Lol. Happy to report it didn't explode and all was back to normal by 7 AM day shift. There's plenty of awesome horror stories from creepy things happening. Or just not having enough staff during bad deliveries. But this one has always stood out in my memory. On patrol while people still working in the building. A woman saw me and freaked out. Running away. She complained to the site manager that she saw a man at night. Got fired. First day on the job. I was like, seriously? Worked as a security guard, did a week-long gig working from 6 PM to 2 AM during setup and the 3 days of the concert itself. First had a plague of locusts during setup. Then on the second night of the concert, one of my supervisors got targeted by a drunk patron who he kicked out earlier. The guy punched him so hard knocked his orbital socket loose. Finally on the third night, just when I thought things were calming down, we had the worst mass shooting in US history take place. I had to keep 6 people from bleeding out till cops arrived in my area backstage about an hour and a half later. My buddy and I were in the guard shack on an important entry point, like 100% ID checks. Can't be expired. Go to double check against a list put out even if the IDs are valid, so if you're not on the list your ID doesn't mean. It's around 3 AM and we're watching creepy YouTube videos during the time that nobody is coming through. He looks up and shouts, "What the?" I look up and scream like a little girl and nearly jump out of my chair. Dollar store Jason Momoa was just face pressed against the glass, grinning, and once he scared the out of us he laughed and walked in. Dude was as big as Jason Momoa and pretty similar looking. I mean dollar store version of him. 10 minutes later, after we calmed down, I looked at him and asked, "Wait, did he even show an ID?" No. No, he did not, LMAO. Y'all were not particularly good guards. 2 people on night shift in a shipyard that employed a few hundred. Big empty ships all around. Looks pretty Scooby-Doo. Go down to the shop to the vending machine and definitely hear a person outside. Long route to get out there and can't find them. Tear around the property for half an hour. Figure out it was probably a drunk crew member staying on one of the ships. Their night watch guy covered for him, I'm positive. Forget about it. Then go to clean the bathrooms at like 3 in the morning. The women's room was on the other side of the wall from the vending machine, where I originally heard him. Puked like 12 square feet on the bathroom floor. Didn't have the proper tools. So it was like cleaning an entire room floor of spaghetti with a spatula. But the spaghetti is actually drunk sailor vomit. Night 1. Caught hobo jerking off in dumpster corral. Night 2. Junkie came speeding in one entrance while I was cleaning the parking lot. Threw out a handful of loose used syringes and peeled out the other entrance without slowing down. I work with disabled people. Youth and adults. In an adult unit. I was paired with another guy and we were looking at the cameras. Waiting for the patients to wake up and go to the bathroom. That'd be around 4 to 5 AM. Right before day shift comes in. At some point, my colleague was dozing on and off, thanks to overtime, and I just saw the patient get up like they do sometimes in horror movies, rigid body movements, and just start to slap his face. Then he ran to the door to slam his head into it. Semicolon. When we got to him, 15 seconds later, we saw what the evening shift guy meant when he said the patient wasn't well. His face was bruised and cut all over from himself mutilating. He looked like a swollen statue of himself crying blood. I'm a security guard at a tech company that currently is expanding one of their already sizable campuses. During the night shift, there's only ever a maximum of 5, and normally 3, of us that have the key to the kingdom, as we call it. Finding gates that aren't secured the same way they were when I checked a few hours before. And we've got dangerous chemicals on site and none of my co-workers said they've touched the locks. Is never fun and is in fact a little terrifying to think about. Downtown Vancouver, Canada. I worked the overnights at McDonald's. This guy who was clearly very strung out kept screaming at me because he wanted free food and almost looked like he was going to leap over the counter. As someone who is a female and only 5 feet tall, of course I was terrified. And just trying not to further aggravate him. The worst part was that the manager knew this was happening, as well as the kitchen staff, as they could also hear it, and no one was really doing anything or even coming up front to even make it appear like I wasn't alone. Finally, after a few threats that he was going to stab me and telling me multiple times that I need to give him free food plus give him more drugs, the manager finally called the cops. Dude had effed off by the time they arrived. I was just super angry that it took them so long to even attempt to help me or take any form of action. I didn't work there for much longer and moved on to brighter days of a 6 AM to 2 PM life as a barista. I worked at a gas station on the night shift for a year. It was pretty deserted a lot of the time. I didn't see too many bad things except some runaway teens. A super creepy guy who wanted me to date his son after he found out I was married. And a guy who just stared at me the whole time with just pure hatred but didn't say more than 2 words to me. But the worst thing was on my first night working there, a regular came in with a gun saying he was robbing the place. After what felt like forever of me just frozen in fear, he started laughing and saying it was just a prank. That was 7 years ago and I still hate his guts. I wouldn't call this a horror story. Just morbid. I work supply chain in a children's hospital. Was having a tight day in my debt. Work politics and such. Went to deliver a child-sized body bag to a PDIQ room. Normally the nurses are at a mini desk outside the room. But I saw her through the door of the room, which was partly open. Handed her the bag and then saw the patient's entire family around the bed, staring at me with expressionless faces and sadness in their eyes as I handed a nurse a body bag for their loved one. It was the most awkward and depressing thing. And it humbled the out of me for the day. I should have just left the bag on the desk near the room. But yeah. Working in a full service hotel. Some sort of plumbing issue occurred during a major storm which led to hundreds of gallons of water pouring through the ceiling of our historic lobby into an area that was set up to host a convention in 6 hours. Working hotel for years is amazing just for the sheer amount of experiences you get. Naked Asian guy drunk sleeping behind desk after cigarette break? Check. Pounds of weed, coke and duffel bag behind arcade machine? Check. Young kids almost getting ran over and chased by car in parking lot due to robbing each other for meth? Check. 76-year-old 2 weeks ago downing 7 bottles of vodka in 2 days and sleeping naked. Falls. Locks door so we have to break it down? Check. I have many more. Stephen King's Night Shift is a good read. Nightmares and Dreamscapes is my favorite collection so far. So the horror story I have is very calm and kinda funny compared to everything here. I took a job between semesters over this last summer as a security guard to check temps and enforce mask policies at the front door. I usually worked night shift, since I suck at waking up early and second shift was the most work shift. One night, I was minding my own business inside the lobby when I noticed a small fluffy animal at the front door. A cute little skunk decided to show up and pay me a visit at 3 AM. Had he figured out how to open the locked door? Or followed someone in? I would have had a very bad horror story for this thread.